Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. I am Brandy Noneke. I am the director of the Citrus Policy Lab headquartered at UC Berkeley, where we support interdisciplinary tech policy research and engagement. It's really exciting for us to join the Public Interest Technology University Network in the Day One project today. And I'm glad that you're able to participate in this important webinar on how to translate your policy ideas into actionable items and processes to be implemented at the start of the next presidency. UC Berkeley is one of the 36 current members of the Public Interest Technology University Network, or PIT-UN, and those on this webinar represent faculty, staff, and students across the PIT-UN with an interest in policy development. The PIT-UN is a partnership of colleges and universities committed to the study and application of technology expertise to advance the public interest in a way that generates public benefits and promotes the public good, particularly for those members of our society least well served historically and today by existing systems and policies. PIT-UN is also dedicated to educating students who can better apply technical understanding and practice to questions of individual rights, justice, social welfare, and the public good. PIT-UN includes individuals who approach these questions from a technological background, and also those coming from other disciplines, such as law and social sciences, who seek to understand, leverage, and respond to the changes brought by new technologies. We're really excited about this partnership today, and I'm excited for my colleagues at the Day One project to kick us off. So I'll pass it over to them now.
Great, thank you so much, Brandy, for that introduction. It's really wonderful to have the chance to talk with this group of attendees and the broader network about the opportunity to partner with us to develop promising ideas into actionable federal proposals. So if we might, we're gonna run through some slides, which I invite our host to kick off now. Here's what we're gonna do during this session. First, we're going to share a little bit of background about the Day One project and the opportunity to work with us on developing actionable ideas. We're then going to turn to a interactive discussion where we actually work through a couple ideas that have been put forward by members of this community. And then we're going to talk through the process and next steps and how we're going to proceed from here with our Public Interest Technology Policy Accelerator. So if we can go to our first or second slide, I'll just kick us off with the beginning. So my name is Dan Correa. I'm the director of the Day One project. I come to this discussion from a background of having worked in science and tech and innovation policy for the last 15 or so years, including 4 years that I spent at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, leading a portfolio of innovation initiatives. And so I wanted to share just at the outset a little bit about, how we approach policymaking and why we are so excited for the opportunity to collaborate with all of you on policy development. So for those who are new to the Day One project, we launched in January as a nonpartisan platform designed to empower a diverse coalition of experts and emerging leaders and new voices to craft compelling proposals on science, tech, and innovation issues that would be ready on day one of the next presidential term. And this is actually a rather radical idea. The entire premise behind this project is that we can fling the policymaking doors wide open, share a bit of the playbook that those of us who have served in government, playbook that we would use to develop our own policy ideas so that they're ready for action, and help enable a bunch of issue experts to pull their ideas together, refine them for action. So there's 4 hypotheses that underpin this project and this process that I think are really fundamental that I wanted to just share up front. So the first one is that policymakers in government, whether it's Congress, federal agencies, or the White House, quite simply, do not have a monopoly on good ideas. And time and again, I've seen firsthand policies get embraced that were the product of the hard work of a motivated, entrepreneurial issue expert who took the time to develop an idea in a way that it was ready for implementation. And it's oftentimes that entrepreneur is outside of government. And so that's sort of the inspiration for how we're thinking about this entire process. And there's an example that I'd give that I think is quite relevant, which is a member of the Pitt UN network, a contributor, Beth Novick from NYU, back in 2008, was on a mission. And her mission was to help to see the federal government embrace an open government agenda. And the work that she did to lay the foundation for that allowed then incoming President Obama in his first days to announce actions and an agenda on this front, and led to an entire years-long and ongoing set of actions on open data and open government that we see to this day. And she was in some ways the prime mover for that. So that's the first one, is that ideas can come from all over, and they do repeatedly, no matter how much it may seem that that's not the case from the outside. Two, policy making happens episodically, which is to say that there are critical agenda setting moments. And these come along every 4 years. So no matter what happens in a presidential election, we know that certainly if there's a new administration, a change in administration, that there's an opportunity to inform policy development because everyone's new, right? But even if there's a re-election of an incumbent administration, we've seen this every time, that there's an opportunity for reprioritization. There's an opportunity, there's lots of new personnel. And so engaging in these episodic moments that are agenda setting like this is time well spent, and doing so on a nonpartisan basis, which is my third hypothesis that motivates this work, is a really powerful and way to ensure that everyone can contribute, and to ensure that we maximize the opportunity for impact, regardless of electoral outcomes. This leads me to the fourth, and I think arguably the most important premise that motivates the work of the Day One Project and why we're excited to work with you, which is that our entire approach treats the policymaker as a customer. And so in engaging in policy development, we ask contributors to our platform to think hard about what you would ask somebody in a policymaker chair. Maybe they're at the FCC, maybe they're at the FTC, maybe they're in Congress, maybe they're at the White House. You want to think hard about what you would ask them to do. And so rather than shipping them a 25-page proposal, we develop 2-page, concise artifacts with an FAQ targeted at policymakers that captures the gist of an idea and the beginnings of an implementation plan. And while that sounds relatively lightweight, it's often quite a process to get there. And I think that it also has two really important features along the process, along the way of developing an idea. And the first is, we bring to this work an orientation that involves having a really expansive sense of the policy toolkit, of the tools that are available to advance any particular idea. And usually this means grappling with approaches and levers that maybe you had not anticipated when you put together your initial idea. So just to grab one that I think is oftentimes more relevant than people think is the federal government has tremendous buying power and buys a whole diversity of products, and procurement is often a powerful but overlooked policy lever. So that's the first point. And then the second feature is that we build into our process iterative development and guidance from those who have served in policymaker roles, who can help brainstorm how to answer the questions that a policymaker would ask when engaging with your idea. So Andrew is going to talk a little bit more about the accelerator process that we've designed, that we've already delivered twice with exciting results, but that we'd like to tailor for this audience because we're excited about all the initial ideas that you've put forward. But before he does, I just want to underscore that that we take a really expansive view of what's changeable in the world. And a big feature of policy development in our eyes is ensuring that you start with an ambitious idea and identify ways to make it real, tailoring it to reality and thinking about initial steps. But the power of this approach is that far more is changeable than oftentimes people initially think. And then finally, I think, as I mentioned, this is a process that we're doing. This is the process that we use for our own policy development. And so I know we have folks with us who've served in government. We have people who have spent a lot of time engaging with public policy, and some people that are brand new. And we've used this in both instances to great effect. So we're excited that we can meet you where you are, and excited for the journey to work with you to develop an idea into something compelling over the course of the accelerator. So let me turn it to Andrew, who's going to say a little more about that, and then we'll dive in further.
Hi, everyone. May you turn to the next slide? So our accelerator is our structured process to refine a compelling idea into a proposal that's ready for implementation with the help of our team and our network of policymakers. And so we have an open call for ideas, which are due for submission by September 1st. And from those pool of ideas, we'll select about 15 of them, and then we'll thrust authors into a 45-day accelerated sprint, which involves an interactive virtual policy development experience. And so you'll work with us and our network of experts to evolve and advance your ideas. And afterwards, after the completion of the accelerator, successful participants will have the opportunity to pitch their policy idea to current and future policymakers. So for example, in July, we hosted our Day One Conversations event with HHS BARDA Director Sandeep Patel on federal health innovations. And so successful participants will have a chance to pitch their policy ideas. Next slide, please. And so our process is organized around the innovation and design lifecycle. And so there's four main parts: define, diagnose, design, and develop. And the first step is to actually figure out the problem that you're solving for, define the challenge, and build around the expected outcomes of your policy. And then you have to conduct the policy mapping to understand the environment and see what opportunities there are, what kind of policy levers there are to implement your proposal. And after we figure that out, we move on to the design phase, which our team and our network of policymakers, policy experts, will help craft your proposal for the policymaker. In this situation, we treat the policymaker like a customer. And lastly, we shape up the idea into our Day One memo format and ready it for uptake. And so I'll hand it back to Dan to talk about the key milestones and calendar for our accelerator.
Great. And to do so, let's move to the next slide. Let me just make sure that we did. Perfect. Okay. So what we have here is just a quick encapsulation of what we expect as we look ahead. And so there's just a few points I wanted to make about our path forward. First of all, if you're joining us today, you have already submitted to us a short summary of an idea. Our hope is that you come out of today's session giving that initial summary a little bit more thought, and we are going to share by email some instructions for how you can refine that a little bit further and submit back to us by September 1st a one paragraph, more or less, summary of the idea that reflects some refining and additional thinking that you've done. So once we receive those on the first, and you'll get all the information by email, as well as probably a reminder of what exact idea it is that you submitted, because I suspect that not everybody remembers. We're going to take what we receive on September 1, by September 1, and we're going to work with the Pitt UN team to identify a subset of those that we'd move forward with. We'll share that on September 8th. And then by September 15th, we're going to start this part-time virtual accelerator, which will run until the beginning of November. And it's going to be relatively lightweight and actually a great deal of fun. But as we said, it's an opportunity to develop and refine an idea into a memo. Between November and December from there on, we will identify opportunities to disseminate these publicly. I think the point I wanted to underscore about this process is the following: that we are highly motivated to find ways to collaborate with this network. This is more than anything, just based on what we saw from the initial ideas that people shared. This network is a bastion of ideas. And so regardless of whether or not your idea is selected for this round, we obviously just have limited resources. And so can only accommodate so many proposals as we move forward. Regardless of that, whether yours is selected, we would love to find ways to continue to partner with both the network and individuals to engage in policy development exercises like this. And so there's gonna be more to come. And so we'll be looking to Adrien to help us out as we move forward beyond the scope of this current accelerator. But I just wanted to underscore that. Okay, let's move to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Luli. But before I do, I wanted to offer just a bit of intro of what we're going to do next. So we've shared with you a little bit about our fundamental orientation towards policymaking. We've shared with you a little bit of an overview of what we mean by the accelerator process and how we hope to refine ideas. We thought it would be an interesting exercise to go through 3 example ideas and hear concise pitches from a couple of individuals, and to use this as an opportunity to gather feedback both from us, but also from the other participants on the phone, to think about how we might continue to evolve these ideas and to sort of engage in an exercise of policy development. And so the thing that I wanted to share just as a caveat for that is, like, I think we should de-risk this. This is meant to be fun. And what we're hoping to do, is to engage in these ideas as being on a journey, recognizing that they're all super early. So our hope is to have a very constructive conversation around, what direction we might continue to evolve them. So I'll turn it over to Luli to take us through, and she will identify the brave souls we have joining us on the Zoom.
Hey everyone. Yes, as Dan mentioned, so I think in this portion, we just want to sort of think together about sort of what are the components of a compelling policy proposal. So many of you shared really interesting ideas with us, some of which are quite developed already, and some of which I think could go in a number of directions based on factors you might consider, what policy tools you might use to take the idea to something that is actionable. So in that vein, we wanted to ask 3 people who submitted ideas before this workshop to share their ideas with the larger group, and we could follow up with discussing a couple components we might consider to make this idea actionable, and also ask you all to share any thoughts you might have in the chat about questions you might ask, or sort of what direction you might go, or what policy levers you might recommend using. So in that, with that, I would love to ask Aaron Rosenthal to share his idea briefly with the group, and let me know if you have any issue unmuting yourself, but I think you should be able to jump in at this point.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I assume you can. Okay, well, thank you for having me. I joined this call today because I wanted to see what Charlton was up to at NYU. I started earlier this year in a research position, and so, but my background was at, worked on the Hill as a legislative aide and assistant, and then worked also at the Department of Transportation in the prior administration. So enjoy this type of stuff, and I put this down because I needed an idea to get down. But I actually think it's a really simple and useful one that has a chance of getting enacted, because there can be support from both sides of the aisle. So I just wrote a couple notes here. I just said a computer today is like paper and pencil used to be. I mean, it's a basic necessity, and if your child does not have access to one, he or she is already being left behind before they leave the starting blocks. So a simple government program could remedy the situation. It's a legislative initiative that will be easy to understand and popular in Congress because it's important, timely, and achievable. I'm sure a lot of you know someone who needs a computer right now, and especially during the time of COVID-19, it's just so essential that everyone has access to one. So I have a preschooler, and a first grader, and this is just something that's top of mind for a lot of parents. And I think, it could be something that both Republicans and Democrats could get behind. So.
Awesome. And I think sort of some of the main points Aaron just discussed are exactly right, and sort of what we also think about when folks share and put ideas through our accelerator process that we consider. I think looking at that opportunity, what the challenge is the issue timely, I think are really important factors that we consider. And I think, as Aaron mentioned, the timeliness of giving every child a computer at a time where remote learning and education has become the norm right now. I think the ability to gain bipartisan support on this proposal, gain funding, is because of the timeliness, is so much easier. Some of the other questions I guess we would sort of ask is are there private-public partnerships that you could consider working with? Is there a specific age group you would target? Is it every child, or are you only considering students in elementary school? In that same vein, so like, how would you, like, what is the next step you would take to achieve it? I think you could definitely go through building support in Congress for this idea, putting some federal funding behind it, perhaps in conjunction with a public-private partnership. But is there sort of like, what are the considerations you would take to actually get it implemented? How are you getting the computers to folks? Are you ensuring that taxpayer dollars are being used in a responsible way, that people that really don't need government support are also getting one, or are you preventing that in some way? And I also would love if Dan or Andrew wanted to jump in with any considerations we might think about.
Yeah, and I'll be relatively quick. I think so. This is such an awesome entry point into a policy idea. In 5 words, you've given us something to get started on, to think about. And so as something like this would be evolved, into a comprehensive proposal, Aaron, as you undoubtedly know, you would want to articulate, okay, what is the opportunity or the challenge? So how is this unlocking progress on a set of societal goals that we think would be common sense and irresistible? And so what might those be? So imagine if, for example, then you'd want to carve out a whole host of ideas around how to implement something like this. Who does what? You know, who would you have to ask in order to get it done? Not just for the budget, but also, is it something that, how would it be administered? And then, you know, where might you get started? And so like, those are oftentimes the ways in which we begin to think through this. And that's what gets represented in an ultimate proposal, and gets written up. But you know, there's a lot of like meaty questions to unlock in that, right? And so how do you position this in a way, as Luli said, that this would be both compelling to a bipartisan audience? Andrew, anything we missed? And I don't know if we're gonna have much time for you to fend off our questions, but let me see if Andrew has anything to answer, and then we'll give Aaron a chance to just say a word or two.
Yeah, I mean, I love proposals like this, and I would say my one piece of feedback is think about who the doers are in this situation. Who will provide every kid a computer? Would an agency take charge? With the Department of Education involved? What specific offices within the Department of Education? These are questions that you definitely have to think of when you envision how your proposal will get implemented by a policymaker.
Fantastic feedback, and it's just a pleasure for me to watch how this process unfolds, even if I am part of the process unfolding, or just an example for the process, but it's really cool to watch. But yeah, I mean, Andrew said kind of what I was gonna touch on, and to answer Danielle and Luli's points, which are all very good. It's like, where do you go to start here? And I envisioned it as something I think, you know, you can, right now there are initiatives on the private side, but this would be something best through Department of Education. And then I would bring in an expert in that field to kind of consult on which entry point, probably look at data to define the age groups that are like most in need. But right now, each school system puts out well, a lot of them do, you know, kind of a poll and ask parents what they need. And so you go off of what the needs are for each district, and it'll vary depending on, you know, each school system. But then that's how you efficiently allocate the money. So it probably won't end up being every single one, but it's just making sure that everyone who needs something has it. So, you know, and yeah, I'll just stop there.
I think,
Right.
no, I think that's great. I think those are all great points, and appreciate you reflecting on the feedback, because I think ultimately there are definitely multiple directions you can go with this. And so we were just proposing some initial questions.
The other thing I'd mention is just like, is always, and this is just reflecting some of what we're seeing in the chat contributions from participants. I mean, this is unusual in the sense that you're starting with a specific idea as opposed to organizing it around a particular challenge. And so you wouldn't want to proceed without doing a deep inquiry of learning from the one laptop per child experiment, what went well and what didn't. And so obviously, I think that's something that we're hearing from the contributors. I think that's exactly right. So let's move on to the second one, just in the interest of time. Thanks so much, Aaron.
Thank you.
So now, yeah, would love to invite Rebecca, who should be on and have the ability to unmute, to share her idea with the group.
So first, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for having me. My idea is that there are multiple proposed federal data privacy laws that have exceptions that would give law enforcement more or better access to sensitive evidence than they would give the criminally accused. And that asymmetry is a repeat pattern in privacy laws. It's almost certainly unintentional, and it unnecessarily threatens accuracy and fairness in the criminal justice system. So my proposal is to encourage the new administration to support privacy bills that include default symmetrical exceptions that treat law enforcement and criminal defendants alike. Thank you.
Awesome. And I think similarly with this proposal, some of the things we would consider is I think certainly it is timely, but sort of framing that in any policy proposal you put forward, I think this proposal is extremely timely, but I think that framing it and explaining why there's an opportunity to build bipartisan support on this issue now is important. I think some of the other things we would think about are, one, of course, how do you build bipartisan support on this issue? Because privacy has been an issue where there has been support, but there hasn't been specific action. And I guess in that vein, if you, in the absence of legislation or before you can actually get to legislation, is there something the government should or can do now that you would consider as a first step in the effort to get there? I think that's another sort of factor we would consider. And I think another thing, this proposal, which Rebecca explained so well, I think also one question we would raise is sort of what do those symmetrical exceptions look like? I think putting that into practice and explaining sort of the standards you would create is important, because I think there's probably a number of ways that that could be interpreted. And also would love to let Andrew or Dan jump in with any additional thoughts.
Yeah, and so first of all, I mean, this is reflects a very thoughtful and specific approach on what is in broad strokes, like federal data privacy is like a very contentious topic for obvious reasons, right? And so I think what I'm curious about is thinking through as you would evolve a proposal like this. It's two things just to underscore what Lily said. One, what are some levers that may be underappreciated that might represent a unique contribution? So are there ways in which you could anticipate this concern and address it that may be through levers of different agencies that are involved in this, just in data? And I can think of a number, right? We don't need to get into it. I think the second was, yeah, if this is trying to address and anticipate legislation, what is something proactive that could be done that would be in absence of legislation, given that that's obviously probabilistic, right? But I think this is we wanted to include some portfolio mix in our ideas that we were discussing here, because this is something that's really specific, but you could make a case for why this is arguably so foundational as a policy idea that you would want to make sure to write something up and address it. Anything else from you, Andrew, before we move on?
Yeah, I think I would underscore Lily's point about what an actual default symmetrical exception looks like, because there's so many directions that you can go with it. And so once you put your proposal in a policymaker's hand, I think what would be helpful is giving them a direction, at least a firm statement of what should be done, or pointing them towards people who can decide what these standards should be, what a default symmetrical exception looks like. For example, that might involve creating a commission or a working group, task force, something of that sort. But I agree with all the points said.
Awesome.
Rebecca, we are glad to give you a chance to reflect on these number of questions.
Well, super quickly, thank you. This is so helpful. I do have proposed default bill text in a law review article that I have forthcoming on this issue. So that seems great. A question about underappreciated levers and agency levers. One resistance that I often get from policymakers to this proposal is that they think law enforcement is going to object to it. But actually, I have some examples of law enforcement around the country weighing into cases on behalf of criminal defendants, because the proposal is not to eliminate law enforcement's access. It's to give defendants otherwise valid access that they have already in other contexts. There's no real legitimate law enforcement interest in suppressing defendants' access to due process effectively. So I don't know, I guess a question for you, and I don't want to take too much time, but is I don't really understand the relationship between agencies and the executive branch and policy, and I don't know how they interact. So how can I learn more about the target audience that you're looking to address with this agenda?
So I think this is that is a perfect framing of how to begin this inquiry. I think, we would try to approach it in a fairly systematic way. Okay, what are the relevant agencies? Then we would want to interrogate what are the levers that we think are relevant that you could actually pull in. But I think what you're describing is like a fast moving space, which is the relationship between some of these law enforcement agencies and local action in this area. So I don't have a specific answer, but I think I have a sense of where we might look. And I think the relationship that I would suggest is that I think leadership from the executive branch could make a difference in federal policy on this.
Just to add there, and not specifically in response to Rebecca's question, but someone asked on the chat, is the policy client for our work only the federal government and not state and local? And I think the answer to that is no. We're definitely some of the proposals that are coming to us are focused on executive action, something that either an agency could implement or, that can be implemented from the executive office of the president, which has more of a convening power. But some of the actions are more focused on Congress specific legislation, and some of them are more closely aligned with action that state and local governments can take, and some involves some combination of all of the above. So I think to answer Rebecca's question very broadly, I think there's probably no completely right answer, but there's a couple different directions that could be explored to address sort of the concerns you raised with your idea.
But Rebecca, you've got a head start. This is pretty great.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay. So Luli, let's do the third one. We'll do it quick and then open it up for questions. I think we've already been accumulating some in the chat.
Yes. Last but not least, I'd love to invite Laura to share the idea she submitted to us.
Hello, everybody. All right, I'll try to be quick. So I'm Laura. I teach at Georgetown Law School. I also direct a clinic there, the Communications and Technology Law Clinic. And before that, I was directing the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown. And before that, I was at New America. So full circle. All right, I think the way that I'll start is by saying that there are a lot of proposals out there to kind of increase technical capacity in the federal government, especially across agencies that are typically dealing with highly technical issues. What we don't see a lot of is efforts to increase civil rights capacity at agencies across the federal government, including at agencies that typically deal with technology issues, but aren't used to dealing with civil rights questions. And to increase technical capacity specifically at civil rights agencies that are dealing with difficult problems at the intersection of civil rights and tech. So just a couple examples here. The FTC, we think of it as a tech agency. It has been asked to look at discriminatory advertising problems and has said in some instances we lack the expertise here. Housing and Urban Development has been asked to look at discriminatory ads specifically as it relates to housing. DHS has been asked to look at algorithmic bias and facial recognition technology that the agency is deploying. These types of problems are arising everywhere, and the many agencies really lack the expertise and the kind of like the process to drive change and policy making at the intersection of civil rights and tech. So there's multiple problems here. This is a really complex problem, as I'm sure all of these are. But just a few things, one, there's this lack of cross expertise between civil rights and tech across agencies. Two, we're seeing a lot of agencies that are grappling with these issues and responding in a way that's not, or being reactive rather than proactive on them. So HUD started looking at discriminatory advertising, but only when it was raised, right, by outsiders. DHS has looked at, and NIST have looked at algorithmic bias and facial recognition, but only when the issue was raised by outsiders. So my proposal really is like a very broad and complex proposal to try to establish an interagency task force to that will develop more discrete policy solutions in several areas. And so one of them is like specifically to train civil rights and tech expertise, to train staffers in this intersection and deploy them across agencies. Another is specifically to enhance interagency collaboration and standardization on civil rights and tech, right? So there are these different areas where solutions are needed. But the start of it, I think, is that we need an administration to express a commitment to solving these problems, and then to establish a task force that will start developing discrete solutions. So, but thanks, and thanks guys for doing this. I'm really looking forward to hearing folks' thoughts and feedback.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Laura. And so similarly, with the previous ideas we discussed, I think one of the factors we would consider at the start is where is the public interest on this issue, and is there sort of is there already bipartisan support? Is there an opportunity to build bipartisan support for this issue if, you know, if funding is especially going to be a factor that you're going to need to push this further? I think one immediate question with respect to the task force is, where is this going to live? Is it going to be a task force launched through the Office of Science and Technology Policy, for example, and how is it going to work across the different agencies? How are you going to measure certain achievements with respect to sort of building technical expertise at various civil rights agencies? Is it going to be like based on numbers of hired staff, or how are those people going to be sort of added to existing structures and agencies? So I think those would be a couple ideas to start, but also would love to invite Dan and Andrew to share others.
So I think this proposal is fairly well developed, right? I mean, you've gotten drawing on your work and your experience, and I think there's a case to be made you list what, 5 different related problems for action. I think where I would let's just bite off a little bit here. How might we augment the tech expertise at agencies with significant civil rights portfolios? Like, let's just start there. Okay, just for the interest of time. And so I think, you know, I would push to even move beyond a task force. Like, what are the things that we already know about successful efforts to integrate technologists into critical roles? So if you were to take the FTC, let's just say, we know that, you know, the FTC has a CTO, but a lot of the action happens outside the tech office of the FTC. And you would want to think about, how do we actually do we need, and then they have like an economic analysis team, like how would you get into the lifeblood of its decision-making processes, smarter technologists, not smarter technologists, but the insights of those who think about these issues every day. And I think that is like a fundamental threshold issue. There's an ambitious agenda there. So I think we would build on what works that hasn't yet been applied in this domain is probably one way to begin thinking about it. And I think we could be that could be an interesting journey to go on as you refine this.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Really quickly, my feedback is just try to scope out the exact desired outcomes that you want. So you have a plan of action here, but firm with measurable outcomes are needed to design the policy around, so that a policymaker knows what to work towards once they get this proposal. And lastly, just scoping out the why, tying the nice bow around your proposal. I mean, it's a package of common sense actions, but it needs an overall framing to make it compelling, to increase the sense of urgency around this. And that's my feedback.
Got it. Thank you. I know you all are going to turn over to questions and discussion generally after this, but I kind of have a follow-up question that I think will apply to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just generally about the need for bipartisan support, right? And so I think that it seems like a really important question. And my question, when I think about this project, clearly, like the White House, you all know this, right? OSTP and the White House generally were doing really important work in this area prior to the administration change. And, the White House Big Data Report in, what year was that? 2016, right? Yeah, and the FTC's report around that time were all about the intersection of civil rights and tech, and there was a move in this direction. Clearly, but it feels like there's limited opportunity for engagement across the aisle. I hear what you're saying when it comes to, if you need appropriations to the agencies, you're going to need to find bipartisan support somehow. But I guess my question is, like, do we need to look for bipartisan support for the framing of a project as a whole? Or is it important to look for bipartisan support specifically in areas where you're going to need bipartisan support to make a thing happen? So specifically, you need appropriations to happen. So what's the thing? How do you frame the proposal to the Appropriations Committee as it relates to the FTC, or as it relates to some version of Tech Congress or something that looks like that? And I guess it's kind of like, should we feel hopeless about proposals that are civil rights focused is kind of like my broad question, because it's going to feel like there's no opportunity for bipartisan support.
So this is a terrific question. And I think our project is a nonpartisan platform, which is different than to suggesting that we think every proposal needs to have a bipartisan lens on it. I think it's the latter of what you described, which is that if there are things that are indispensable steps on the way to success for the idea that you have that require some sort of congressional avenue, that contemplating that at the outset in your framing might be useful. But I think in lots of cases, so for a lot of proposals that we've had through our pipeline, we've done 50 plus at this point. There's an ambitious version of the idea. Oftentimes that may require some sort of congressional action, like let's launch a DARPA for health at the Department of Health and Human Services. Turns out you need Congress to do something. Although actually that idea that we put through, the current administration has gotten started on. But the point is that there can often be two versions of an idea. It depends on the topic, but there may be look, if we had on this topic an administration that was really friendly, here's the path forward that I propose using executive action. But it kind of depends on the topic and what you think, what we kind of jointly diagnose the dynamics to be, right?
Got it.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I'll turn my video off and resume being a panelist. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. So this was meant to just be an initial sort of engagement with a few of the ideas. We're not suggesting that necessarily that feedback would be is meant to be determinative. We're hoping to provide a little bit of constructive ideas for how we think about evolving an idea and readying it for implementation, the kinds of questions we would ask and workshop. So what we wanted to do in the remaining time we have was address a couple questions before we jump into next steps. And be a little more clear about what we're going to be sharing after this call and what we're going to be asking from you by September 1, if you're interested in contributing an idea as a candidate for this process. So if you have a question, here's what I'll say. I'll speak to the slide, but as I'm doing that, if you have a question, please submit it into the Q&A or in the chat. We've got just a couple that we can address, but would certainly welcome more. So here's what we're gonna do next. After this session, we are gonna send to participants, everyone who submitted an initial idea through the web form, we're gonna send a follow-up email. And we're gonna invite you to refine that idea into a short paragraph, nothing crazy, that includes the topper summary, a few descriptive sentences of what the challenge and the opportunity looks like. Why is this compelling? Imagine if the world looked different. What are some initial ideas you have for policy actions? And then finally, some key questions you hope to answer. And this is meant to be an honest engagement of where do you think that this proposal needs to evolve? What are the ways in which what are the things you would want to answer in order to turn it into a proposal? And so we'll share all that. That's what we anticipate coming next. And as we said, we will be kicking off on the 15th. So the point I wanted to make before we answer some of the questions was just the following. I think even having a collection of paragraph level ideas would be a valuable input into our process. We would love to be able to have a public interest technology collection of ideas that we could advance. And so we invite as many people as are interested in developing an idea further to contribute one, and we look forward to working with you. So with that, I'll turn to questions. We have a question from Ahmoud that is about the question is the following: is the idea of this process to go for low-hanging fruit, policies that are implementable in a short time horizon? What about more comprehensive systematic problems or issues? And so I think we addressed that a little bit in our back and forth just now, but the goal is to think ambitiously, but also to help a policymaker identify a target policymaker as a customer and give them some of the tools that if they were persuaded of the importance of your idea, because you made the case so compellingly and answered all their questions that would possibly defeat it, that you would give them the tools to help them get started. So this means that I think we welcome ambitious ideas that tackle underlying systemic problems, but the goal is to also find a toehold. And part of our process is to uncover that. So we don't expect that you necessarily have that. That could be one of your open questions that you share with us. But we certainly want to work through that process. And I welcome others to jump in here. So if we've gotten a question about, will we be selecting 15 ideas from the PIT UN network? The answer is yes. And the time commitment for engaging in the accelerator is actually relatively modest. People who we have a current cohort right now that's going through the process. They're doing it. They all have full-time jobs or have personal responsibilities that are comprehensive. And so it usually it looks like working on a proposal, having a few conversations with experts as you do it, doing some research over the course of 45 days. And there's a couple cohort activities sprinkled throughout the 45 days. So it's relatively light. But we think that the product speaks for itself. And you can see some of the products on our website today. So there was a question around about, I think people are, because we've featured just a couple of the proposals, we have, I think there's interest among the participants to see the rest of them. So we're gonna talk to Andreen and the rest of the PIT UN network to figure out how we might do that. But we will circle back on that question by email. But we'd certainly, we want to be respectful of the fact that the people didn't necessarily share something anticipating that it would be shared broadly. But also I know that there's an interest in seeing what others have submitted. One thing that we'd be interested in exploring is we'd like to do some matchmaking, because what we've seen is that there's a number of proposals that are similar. So we're going to explore ways in which we can invite submitters who have similar ideas to see if they're interested in joining forces with another contributor. Luli, is there anything else that I'm missing in terms of questions that might have come through here?
I think you covered it.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I know we've got from our colleagues at PIT UN and Brandy who introduced us, any other items that we should cover? We wanted to aim to be comprehensive and do this in an hour. I think we're right at the top of the hour. But anything else we should be sure to cover before we wrap? And we can also go to the next slide as we close out. Great. This is just recapitulates. Due date on the 8th, decision on the 1st, decision on the 8th. kick off on the 15th, and then our showcase in November and December. Looks like we have. Great. Okay, so we've got, sorry, I've got a couple other questions that I just didn't see. So we have two questions. One is about collaborating on ideas that might be similar. Yes, so as I mentioned, we're going to facilitate that. We'd love to welcome that and encourage collaborations as folks are interested. So once we get ideas, we'll do that on the other side of September 1st. We may reach out to you and say, hey, somebody else has an idea. But for now, we encourage you to submit the idea that you are most passionate about, and we will do the matchmaking on the other side. Secondly, there was a question from Laura about our relationship to various campaigns and transitions. So we make our materials publicly and privately available to policymakers. We have relationships with current policymakers in the executive branch and on the Hill, and we've received outreach from the various campaigns and the various policy and transition arms. So we are doing this in a nonpartisan stance and are abiding by that. But certainly we are optimistic that our work can land with impact, because we know how to meet the needs of the policymakers who are interested in these ideas. And we look forward to working with you on crafting ideas with that in mind. Cool. Well, great. Well, with that as a capstone, I think we've addressed the questions we've had. Very excited to take the next step. We look forward to hearing from you by September 1, and keep an eye out for an email from us. So thanks so much, everybody. And thank you very much to Andreen and the rest of the PIT UN network. We're excited for the path ahead.